This whole program today is in loving memory of Rabbi Ezra Labaton, alav shalom, who was our rabbi in Congregation Magen David West Deal for 35 years or so. And he was a close friend of mine from elementary school in Magen David. And I owe everything to him. In my, as we moved into the area, he helped my wife and me and raise our children in the proper way. And he also encouraged me to continue my learning and develop in my learning. And if not for him and his guidance all these years, I would not be who I am today. So everything I say really goes back to him. He has the merit. One of the famous Pesukim that Rabbi Labaton alav shalom always repeated was from Yirmiyahu. And this is an overarching theme throughout his entire career as a rabbi, a constant message on what we should look for, what we should look to, how we should live our lives. And I'll just summarize. It comes from the 9th Perek of Yirmiyahu, Pasuk 22. And it goes like this: Ko amar Adonai, so says God, Al yitalel chacham v'chachmato. Someone shouldn't be overly proud and praiseworthy, praise himself, or consider his wisdom something to be proud about, nor a gibor b'gvurato, a strong person in his strength, in these talents that a person has, nor a wealthy man ashir be'oshro, nor a wealthy man in his wealth, because we can't count on our wisdom, our strength, or our wealth. Eventually, they could recede, they could withdraw from us, and we end up with an empty life. So, ki bezot yitaleh adam. This is what Yirmiyahu says, and this is what the guiding principle of Rabbi Labaton. That a person should be considered praiseworthy. He should lead his life, and so he accumulates these values and characteristics, and that's what he should be proud of. What is that? Haskel v'yadoa oti. To have intellectual knowledge of me, of who God is, and what God's message is, that He's the creator of the universe, and He has given us a Torah to guide us. V'yadoa oti, to know God, not just knowledge like mathematical knowledge or knowledge of some concrete area, psychology, sociology. No, yadoa is a profound, experiential knowledge of me. Ki ani Adonai, because I want you to model your life after me. And what do I stand for? I stand for Oseh Chesed, Mishpat Utzedakah Ba'aretz. Chesed, good deeds. Mishpat, justice. Tzedakah, righteousness in the land. Ki be'ele, these are the things, these are the values that I want. So this is the backdrop of not only Rabbi Labaton, alav shalom, but really what Yirmiyahu was saying to his generation. Now Yirmiyahu lived in the last years of the Bet HaMikdash Harishon, the first temple, and he prophesied for around 40 years, and he even lived for a short while after the destruction of the temple. So he was the last Navi, really, to give rebuke and warning to his generation that they weren't following the right way, that they were. We know the three cardinal sins that is associated with the destruction of the first temple. They were avodah zarah, idol worship, gilui arayot, immorality, And, excuse me, Dazara, what? Shifchut Damim, thank you, murder. Thank you, Jamie. These are the three cardinal sins that they, and there were sins committed all the way down from the king, the last kings of Yehudah. Maybe not so much Tzidkiyahu, we'll see, and that's the subject of my class today, is to focus on Tzidkiyahu. Not only the kings, but the Kohanim, the priests, the whole operation of the Beit HaMikdash, the judges, the leaders, the political leaders, all those associated in the realm of the royalty. So it was a pervasive atmosphere of corruption, of immorality. So Yirmiyahu's message is, you lost the idea. It's not about gaining wealth. It's not about even gaining wisdom it doesn't lead to actions and behavior of chesed, of righteousness and justice and so on. They lost it. So I want to concentrate. By the way, these are the three cardinal sins, but our chapter on Yirmiyahu 34 is going to give you a different perspective of what the last straw was that led to the destruction. Okay? The destruction was in 586 BC. Okay? And Tzidkiyahu, the king Tzidkiyahu, was king from 597 to 586. That was that 11 years or so. Okay? His name was really Yimiyahu, his original name, but they changed his name to Tzidkiyahu. Why would you think they changed his name to Tzidkiyahu? Sadiq, Sedek, right? Yahu is who? Hashem. That he was going to represent Tzedakah. They had hopes that he was going to change the direction. Who was he anointed as king, crowned as king? Anyone know? Did the Jews crown him king? Close. Close. Not Egypt. Who's the threat at the time? Babylonia. Greece is 400 years past. Okay, so now we need to get a sense of the political atmosphere before we get into this. Okay, we get into political very, very briefly. We had Egypt to the south, Assyria and Babylon to the north, and Israel is right in between. So it was always vying. There was switching of allegiances. First, Assyria came down and exiled the 10 tribes. That was 100 years before. That was the time, right? The time of Yeshayahu. This is 100 years later. Then the Babylonians gained strength, but not so strong. Assyria aligned with Egypt. Israel aligned with Egypt against Babel. But this was after Babel exiled the leadership, Yoachim. This was Yoachim and Yoachim, and that's why you have the story of Esther and Mordechai. Mordechai is one of those exilees with Yehoiachin. They were exiled to Babylon, the first wave of exile but then they got another chance, and they had a siege on Israel, Babylon, and then Egypt came across. And what did Tzidkiyahu do? He said, what am I going to do? I'm caught in between these two. I have allegiances to Babel because they appointed me king, but Egypt is coming up, and we really don't want Babylon because they put a siege on us. So now Egypt is coming up. What the armies that were in siege left for a while, and Tzidkiyahu aligned himself with Egypt. And Yirmiyahu said, no, don't align yourself with Egypt. Go into exile with Babylon, with Babel. Amazing. He said, don't fight with Bavel. Don't rebel against Bavel. What was his opinion? His opinion was that if you go with Bavel, yes, you'll be in exile. You'll be in exile, but it'll only be for 70 years, and then you need to come back. So they say, you're going to go to Bavel, go there, marry other Jewish women, have children, create a life, a community for yourself for those 70 years, but know that you're going to come back. And that's exactly what happened. But by going to align with Egypt, what happened? Bavel got really mad. They came back, and that's when the destruction was on the line. So you have to imagine what's going on in Yerushalayim at this time. Once they see actually it was the Kasdim, who were the military hires of Bavel, they see them receding. So what did they do? This comes to our perek. They see that they're receding, and Tzidkiyahu makes a berit, a covenant, to free the slaves. And this is the point I want to concentrate on: the freeing of the slaves. Right now, the understanding is that they weren't freed before, for a long time. The wealthy people, remember, slaves in those times were indebted slaves because they couldn't pay back. They were in slaves, and we have a provision in the Torah. What should happen with the slave who comes under your power, under your authority? They were Jewish slaves.
He released them after a certain time.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm talking about. He released them. Okay, I'm going to give you the short story, then I'm going to go into the perek. He released them, but then when the Babylonians came back, his officers and political leaders around him said, bring back the slaves. So there was a window where there was a feeling that we were going to get by and maybe not be destroyed, not be on that arc of destruction, because we're now fulfilling the word of God. What was so important about freeing the slaves, and why, when it was turned back after they made a berit, why was it so important that was the end? That it wasn't avodah zarah, it wasn't shefichut damim, it wasn't gilui arayot, it wasn't the cardinal sins. It was this, taking back the slaves. So let's go to our perek and see what happens. I think I need a copy. Oh, I have one, sorry. Now, bear with me, because I probably won't get to everything I want to do, but just to tell you, give you again another heads up. The idea of what happens to a Jewish slave appears 3 times in the Torah. It appears in Shemot, it appears in Vayikra, and it appears in Devarim. You have the sources here. Now we're going to see, why is it so important? We also know the last source is from Bereshit, from the covenant of the pieces, Berit ben Abetarim, that God made with Avraham. It's the only time that is mentioned Berit ben Abetarim, that God split the animal in 2, and a fire went through it, and this was a sign of a covenant that they had in those times, that if you broke your promise of the covenant, your treaty, if you broke it, the consequences would be you'd be torn apart like this animal has been torn apart. Very severe consequences. So what was the Berit Avraham? Turn to your last page. On the bold, number 18, Pasuk 18. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Avraham, saying, to your offspring I assign the land from the river of Egypt to the great river of the Euphrates. This was the promise of the land, that your descendants will inherit the land. But what would happen before? Elliot Braha, what would happen before they got to inherit the land? What did God say to Abraham? That your children will be slaves in Egypt for 400 years. So there's a notion of slavery, okay, and then leaving the slavery and enjoying the reward of having a covenant with God. That's God's covenant. So you see, it's surrounding around the idea of experiencing slavery. So that's why it was so important when we had to experience slavery in order to become this nation that is so sensitive to slavery. So turn to your source now. Let's see, the pages aren't numbered. On the second page, the back of the first page, it was so important that the Aseret HaDiberot begin how? Anochi Hashem Elohecha asher hotzeticha me'eretz Mitzrayim bevet avadim. The first commandment is what? I am God. I am God. Who am I? I took you out of Egypt, mibet avadim, from the house of slavery, from years of slavery, from years of oppression, and He didn't put us there. There was God sees the future. Doesn't mean we don't have free will. He knows that that's what's going to happen, but we have the free will. We went down there. And there's a consequence. There was a series of behaviors that took place that we ended up there. But the point is that the Aseret HaDiberot, which is what we all look to as the main values of Judaism, is that I'm the one who took you out of Egypt, not the one who created the world. I'm the one who took you out of Egypt from the house of slavery. Slavery is such an important idea. So go to your next one. It's so important that even within the Aseret HaDiberot, what is the commandment of Shabbat, the fourth commandment, is Zachor Yom HaShabbat L'Kadsho. Why? Shesh Yamim Ta'avod, the word avod, to work, to be a slave to your job, whatever it is, and you do all your work. Yom Shvi Shabbat. Shabbat L'Adonai Elohecha. Lo ta'aseh kol melachai. You're not to do any work. Not you, not your children, not your slaves. Very important. It's so important that it's built into the Shabbat and all our holidays and everything. We remember Mitzrayim. We remember what we were because it's a key idea of compassion. You want to know God, like Yirmiyahu says, Haskel v'yado. You have to have this idea of what it's like to be a slave and have compassion. Okay, so that's not all. Right after the Aseret HaDiberot, what is the next parasha? Joe? After Yitro. What comes after Yitro? Mishpatim. What's the first halacha of Mishpatim? It's on your second page. Sorry, Nisim?
Slaves.
Right? Ki tiknei eved ivri. When it happens that you acquire a Jewish slave. How? He's indebted to you. He's poor. He ran out of money. Or he didn't have enough money. He borrowed the money because he didn't have enough money or he didn't have seed to plant his field. He came to you. You gave it to him. It didn't work out. The crop didn't come up. He couldn't pay you back. What happens? Oh, come, you have to work with me to pay off your debt. Now it sounds, in today's world, it sounds maybe not so kind. Okay? But in that world, we have this idea, and the Jewish slave and all the mishpatim that we have around slavery try to mitigate the unfortunate situation that people end up in poverty, and how do we deal with it? So the modern times has different solutions. Social welfare, we have a net to help people, but we'll see how dangerous that is and how people fall into debt and just a cycle of pain and suffering, and leads to all kinds of social problems, family problems and social problems. But what does the Torah tell us? He's going to work for you 6 years, and then you have to let him go. You have to let him go. And not only that, on the 7th year, when you set him free, notice the word hofshi is free, hinam. You should not just let him go without anything. You read the translation, and so on. And then, if he says, "Well, I like the situation. Ahavti et Adoni, et ishti ve'panai, lo yitzeh hofshi." He doesn't go free, but then he brings him to the lintel, and he pierces his ear with an awl, and then he is a slave le'olam. Now, le'olam, forever, is not really forever. It's until what year, Joe? The Yovel, the Jubilee year, the 50th year. And that's what it has in the book of Vayikra, going down the list. Notice that in the book of Vayikra, which is Sefer Kohanim, which is really about the Korbanot and all that, okay, the notion of Kedusha, we have the parasha of Kedoshim to you. We have the notion of Kedusha. V'kidashtem et shenat ha'hamishim shana, ukratem deror ba'aretz. The whole Yoshevea, Yovel, he, tiyeh lachem, v'shavtem ish el ha'chozato, v'ish el mishpachto, tashuvu. Notice the words, v'shavtem, Yoshveh, even though it means here that shall return to their land, to their holdings, their portion of land that is theirs. They return after the 50th year. So this is connected to Kedusha, holiness. Why are we different? Because at the end of the day, when it comes to the Jubilee year, that's it. We all return. You don't owe me any more money. You can go back to your land now. You sold your land because you had to. Now you can go back to your land. And there are a lot of halachot regarding this, but the idea is kratem deror. The word deror is proclaim release. Kratem deror, release, freedom. Freedom shall reign throughout the land. We say this all the time. This is the freedom bell that we say in the Jubilee year. And it's built in. So we have Shabbat, we have the Yovel. All these are media through which we limit and pull back. We mitigate the idea of slavery. That's not forever. We don't have who is our owner and who is our authority. It's only God. No human being could eventually hold so much authority over someone to the point where it's so oppressive, a human being cannot own another human being. He has to behave a certain way, and we see that. Now, in Vayikra, in addition to that, it says, "V'lo tonu ish amito," and you shall not wrong one another. Tonu is also oppress. V'yaret Elohecha, you shall fear your God, ki ani Hashem Elohechem, and you should do all of my mitzvot. And then v'shavtem ala haaretz lavetach. There's the notion that if you behave properly and you fulfill my laws, you may live upon the land in security. And what is galut? What is exile? It's the flip side of it. When you don't listen to me, you don't listen to my laws, you don't treat the slaves properly, what's going to happen? You're going to be exiled. You're going to be thrown out. You're not going to live securely. Okay. Lastly, in the book of Devarim, okay, which is on the back of the second page. We have now the book of Devarim. My daughter-in-law Joy will tell you is a different book. It's written by Moshe. It's Moshe's words to Am Yisrael. Of course, they're the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as all the words of the Torah are. But before Am Yisrael is going into the land of Israel, it's the 40th year, and they're about to enter the land, Moshe gives a series of speeches in the book of Devarim. And within this book is a lot of warnings, there's a lot of rebuke of what your ancestors did and why they were punished and why they didn't get a chance to leave the land. And even you had moments where you did the wrong things, but God's still forgiving you because He wants this generation to enter the land. What happens? One of the laws that we repeat is on Pasuk 12. Ki machel lecha achicha ivri or ivriya ve'avdecha shesh shanim u'bashana shevi'it tish'a lechenu chofshi me'amecha. Again, here it's repeating the same idea. V'chi tish'a lechenu chofshi me'imach lo tish'a lechenu rekam. This is something that's added. Don't let him leave without anything. You have to kick him out. You have to kick him out, but not empty-handed. In Shemot we said if he came with his clothing, he can. If he came with his wife, he can. But over here it's even more. Ha'anik ta'anik lo b'tzonecha migvecha asher beracha Hashem lohecha titen lo. So that's Pasuk 14. You have to give him things. Don't let him go empty-handed. Furnish him out of the flock, the threshing floor, and the vat of wine, where they make wine. Okay, these are the three major things that you have to give him. Don't let him go. Just why you want him to leave your authority and still have a chance to remake himself. You know what it's like when you finally get out of debt and you start now you're at the bottom at zero. You know what it's like to have to climb up again. But what if, Elliot, what if they gave you a bridge loan, okay, that was free? Now I'm giving you worked under me for 6 years, I'm letting you go, we had a very good time, you served me well, you paid back your debt. Now I'm going to give you a bridge loan of $10,000, seed money. Now you could go out and you could do things with it. This is the system of justice that the Torah wants to, I'm relating it to today's world so you could identify with it. But we don't want to just let someone go. He'll fail. He'll be right back in your house, and a slave for another 6 years. We don't want that. So, and why? V'zacharta ki eved hayita be'eretz Mitzrayim v'yivtecha Hashem Elokecha ken anochi mitzavecha et habar hazeh hayom. Going back to Mitzrayim again, going back Aseret Tibirot, going back to Mishpatim, going back to Vayikra. Remember, remember, remember. It's the slave we have to be most sensitive to. Now let's go to our perek. Now you have the background. You have the background of the Berit. You have the background of Shemot, Vayikra, and Devarim. Now let's see what happens. Now there are three preliminary prophecies in this perek until we get to the last one. Okay, Hadavar asher haya Yirmiyahu me'et Adonai u'Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel v'chol chelo v'chol eretz ma'amshet yado v'chol ha'amim nechamim al Yerushalayim v'al kol harei lemor. Nebuchadnezzar he gathered many nations. He conquered many nations surrounding Israel. So this is why did Hashem allow Nebuchadnezzar to have such power? Because ultimately he wanted Bavel to conquer Egypt and to put a hold on Israel. He conquered Egypt later on, but first to get Egypt off, and then conquer Israel and have the hold on Israel. He did it initially with the exile of the previous kings, right? And then Tzidkiyahu came, he appointed Tzidkiyahu. When he saw Tzidkiyahu rebelled, he said, now I'm going to tighten the noose on him. And now, why did Hashem allow this? Because he saw what Tzidkiyahu did, or what they did under his reign. They lost even that opportunity to avoid exile. So now the arm of punishment is Nebuchadnezzar, is Bavel. And Bavel will get its due later on. We see that they were conquered by the Persians, then the Persians by the Greeks, and the Greeks by the Romans. The Romans, they still go on today, we'll see. Okay, but getting back to this. It's going to be destroyed, fired. And now this is going to be the prophecy regarding Tzidkiyahu. Remember, he was called Tzidkiyahu, but he ends up not doing tzedek, and his prophecy is going to be that you're not going to escape. He's going to catch you. You're going to go to Bavel. Eventually, his eyes would be gouged. Right. Good. Thank you. Okay. You're not going to die by sword. Beshalom tamut. You're going to live in peace, relatively, but you're going to see everything around you burn. You can see all your children killed, but you're going to survive. Now, pasuk 6. Okay. The armies of Bavel, it's good to read the translation along, are warring with Yerushalayim. All the other towns, we went to Lachish. We saw that was a stronghold, a military stronghold that Nebuchadnezzar had a siege on and eventually conquered, and he celebrated this victory by making these murals, and these murals survive today, and you could see them in the Israeli Museum. Yes, so it's a real thing. And you go to Lachish, Tel Lachish, you'll see it's an unbelievable story. Anyway, the prophecy is that all the surrounding areas of Yehuda are going to be destroyed, and Yerushalayim is going to be destroyed. It's coming. Why? Now, number 4, pasuk 8. What is this, Joy? What is this? This is the key here. Pasuk 8.
Oh, the covenant?
Right. The word came to Jeremiah from the Lord after King Tzidkiyahu had made a covenant with all the people in Yerushalayim to proclaim a release among them. He made a berit. Okay? L'shaleach ish et avdo v'ish et shfato ha'ivri avriya hofshim livelti eved ba'am bihudi achihu ish. So that he should no longer be a slave. He did the berit. Okay? Now, vayishmeu kol hasanim v'kol ha'am asher ba'u ba'berit l'shaleach ish et avdo v'ish et shfato hofshim livelti ovdi ba'am od vayishmeu vayishel. His officers, they listened to him, and they freed the slaves. So Tzidkiyahu did something very good. We're hoping now that this is going to turn the tide. And his officers agreed with him. Vayashuvu acharechen. Now here the word vayashuvu. Okay? There's vayshelechu, they sent them out. Vayashuvu. What's the key word of vayashuvu? What other word do we have from vayashuvu? It's teshuvah. But this vayashuvu return is not teshuvah. It's the antithesis to teshuvah. Yes, they came back. They went back on their word. Okay? Vayashuvu acharechen. They turned back on their word. Vayashuvu, they returned all the slaves that they had set free. And the word vaychbishum, the word lichbosh, means to conquer. It's a very forceful. In other words, they forced them to come back and to stay there and to continue their slavery, their servitude to them. Okay? Now, pasuk 12. Ko amar Adonai. So says God. Elohei Israel. Right? Now, look, pay attention to this. Anochi. What's Anochi remind you of? Aseret Edorot. Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Anochi karati berit et avotechem. Beyom hotzi etchem eretz Mitzrayim mibet avadim. I had a berit with you on Har Sinai, that you're going to be my nation, you can follow my word, and I'm going to be your God. And I said, after 7 years, you're going to send out your slaves, and you're going to set them free. And lo shamu avotechem elai velo hitu et oznam. They didn't listen to me. Vatashuvu atem hayom. And, okay, you actually made an attempt to bring them back. Notice the word deror from Vayikra, freedom, deror. You made an attempt and you sent them out. They actually, Tzidkiyahu and the officers, they struck a covenant. Look at the word. Okay. Vatashuvu techalu et shemi. Word again. Vatashuvu. You went back on your word and you profaned my name, and you returned. Vatashuvu ish et avdo veish et shifrato asher atem chorshim lenafsham. Vatichpeshu otam, and you conquered them. Liot lachem lavadim shvachot. Okay, because you did this, lachen ko amar Hashem atem. You didn't listen to me. Lekro deror, to proclaim freedom. Ish le'achiv, your brothers, actually your brothers. Hini koreh lachem deror. I am going to, ironically, proclaim freedom, but it's not going to be what you think. It's going to be that the freedom is that you're going to die from sword, from dever, plague, and famine. Now, ונתתי את האנשים העוברים את בריתי, אשר לא הקימו את דברי הברית, אשר כרתו לפני העגל אשר כרתו לשניים, ויעברו בין בתריו. בתריו reminds us of Berit ben Abetarim, and this is the kind of covenant you made, and you broke it, and now you're going to suffer the consequences. And this is why, ultimately, Tzidkiyahu was really the last king. They had appointed Gedaliah after they caught Tzidkiyahu and they gouged out his eyes, and all these prophecies came true. But the point I want to say in the end, in summary, is that the social justice regarding enslaving on every level today, we don't see it, but there's other means of enslaving people by keeping them down on their jobs, by not giving them public education, by not giving them the right social network where things go wrong. We're not providing some governmental society network and shield that we don't have poor people, or we reduce the number of poor people, and that we are more generous in what we do. Thank God we are a community of generosity and philanthropy. We have this engraved in our hearts and in our behavior. And the lesson on this day of Tish'a BeAb, we see what really leads to destruction. It's destruction that we bring on by not adhering to the mitzvot of the Torah. Any questions?
Is this related to Shemitah? Like how we always also have to give away some of our earnings?
Shemitah?
I'm saying this idea that we have to let our slaves go in a certain year, and we also have to let our lands.
Yeah, the Vayikra is in the context of Shemitah and then Yovel.
Okay.
That's in the book of, why is that? Because the book of Vayikra is really the book about Kedusha, the Kohanim, the Beit HaMikdash, the Mishkan, the Korbanot, and all the holidays. It's what separates us from the rest of the world. We have these ideas engraved in our hearts and our minds.
Are we saying Tzidkiyahu is to blame?
Okay, so it's a complicated thing about Tzidkiyahu. He seemed that he was caught, he was a weaker king, and that he couldn't overcome the political intrigue that was going on, and
Good idea.
he had a good idea, but he wasn't strong enough, and he actually was somewhat good to Yirmiyahu. He let him out of jail, and he listened to him. He actually went to Yirmiyahu for advice, but at the end of the day, the leaders, the politics around him overcame, and he couldn't fight it. So you're right. He wasn't like the other kings of Yehudah, who were actively doing the 3 cardinal sins. Okay. Tizku l'ro'ot b'nachamat Zion.